Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as once again it is going to remain very unsettled over the coming days as we continue to see low pressure coming in off the Atlantic. We're not going to see anything too stormy. The low pressure systems are moving fairly slowly and they're not terribly deep with tight isobars, but what we do have is lower pressure in general, lots of weather fronts colliding air masses, and it just means plenty of showers and even some longer spells of rain like we're seeing across northern Scotland at the moment. We are, though, seeing very interesting signs continuing into the middle to second half of the month that we've been talking about a lot over the past week or so. And today we have got probably the coldest runs we've seen all autumn so far from both the GFS and the ECMWF, both pulling in very cold air masses from the north and northeast in only around 10 days' time. Now, I will stress, even if these did come off, we probably won't see anything too exceptional just because we are looking at kind of the middle of November, still probably 2, 3, 4 weeks too early to see major cold, but still could see lots of frost, ice, maybe even some snow in areas in the north, and you can't even rule it out further southwards if the right scenario did come up. So very interesting runs today, and we'll look at that in more detail in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe. Now, if you start on the live radar, you can see for most it's a sunnier day, a few showers around, but nothing too bad. For Scotland, though, we are still seeing the remnants of this big spell of heavy rain clearing through. Again, getting sort of relief rainfall over some of the western hills and mountains, but it should clear over the coming hours. But we will continue to see areas of rain moving in. We are going to be very up and down over the next 4 or 5 days with, yes, some drier and warmer spells as we have pretty mild southwesterly winds pushing in, but equally some pretty horrific rainy spells like across Scotland at the moment. So you can see elsewhere, if we look at the temperatures this afternoon, we've got this a little bit earlier in the day than usual, around 2 p.m, temperatures that are actually really mild, and it's widely yellow, and there are a few hints of orange appearing on some of the charts. This is not what we'd be expecting in early November. This is very mild for the time of year, and it's because we've got southwesterly winds. We're in between the weather systems, so we've got sunshine, even though, yes, it's not terribly strong this time of year, it's sunshine nonetheless. We are seeing those temperatures responding. You can see much of Western Europe is very mild, and it's all because a southwesterly wind is pulling in, much colder across Asia and the Far East, and that's because this southwesterly wind is pushing milder air for Europe, colder air is plunging further eastwards. So we are very mild for our latitude this time of year. We do see it quite a lot during the winter months, given the jet stream and the North Atlantic providing that moisture and that milder air. But yeah, it is pretty remarkable right now given how cold it is around the Earth at this latitude. But as I said, longer range, perhaps that could all be changing. Now, if you look at the latest UKV, you can see that rain spreading through early this morning, clearing Scotland over the next few hours, and through the rest of the evening into the early hours of Thursday, it's not too bad. As we head into Thursday afternoon, still some quite hefty showers around, but it's not terribly widespread, so once again, it shouldn't be too bad. Progressing through Thursday into Friday, a few showers in the morning, and then a longer spell of rain tries to move in, but again, it struggles as it pushes eastwards, but it still maintains a bit of structure as it does slowly clear away. Into Saturday, some further rain in the west, more showery, and as we head into Sunday, still some longer spells of rain at times, but you can see they are struggling to progress eastwards, and this is because high pressure is starting to make an influence around that 10th, 11th, 12th of November point, and that's why these areas of precipitation aren't moving west to east or southwest to northeast. They are kind of stuttering, disintegrating further eastwards and moving further northwards as they come up against a wall of higher pressure that is building in across Europe. And that, as I said, is going to eventually build in across us and could head northwards during the middle portion of the month and open the doors to colder potential. Now, if you look at the max temperatures, you can see it is exceptionally mild once again today, widely mid to high teens, 17 or even 18 degrees out there. It is really on the top end for temperatures this time of year. We're not far from 20 degrees, and that is remarkable when we think of November, given the short days, the weak sunshine. 20 degrees is remarkable. We're not too far away from that. As we progress into Thursday, it's a similar story, maybe not quite as mild, but still 16 or 17. Friday, it's again very mild, around 14, 15, 16. Saturday, a little bit cooler, but still low teens for many. And then into Sunday, still low teens, 13, 14, 15 degrees. So looking above average over the next 4 or 5 days. But as we'll see from the longer range charts in a few moments' time, it is a downwards trend. You can already see on the UKV, we're slowly going from 17, 18 to 13, 14 by the weekend. And into next week, we could nudge back into the single digits and could go even colder than that as we head into that longer range. Now, if you do have a look at the latest GFS now, you can see the west to southwesterly winds pushing at the moment, if not even southerly winds today, and that's what's causing the precipitation and milder conditions. You can see heights are already rising towards Greenland and Iceland, but they're not going to get properly going until next week. You can see we continue to see low pressure trying to come off the Atlantic, and as soon as this weekend, we can see high pressure is starting to move towards Greenland. But it really only takes over into next week, where we start to see these lows clear to our south. Northerly winds start to develop and colder air starts to leak into parts of Scandinavia and Northern Europe in general. As we progress over the coming days, those lows, as I said, nudge further and further southwards all the way towards the Mediterranean, and look what happens. It opens the door to a north to northeasterly winds in 10 days' time. Now, there's uncertainty how much of this high pressure will hang on around Greenland. As ever with these sort of patterns, if that high doesn't hang on, topples quickly, we don't get the cold air in. But in this run, it just about holds on, and you can see we do see a full-fledged northerly wind. We sort of follow those isobars all the way from the UK, past Scandinavia, Svalbard, all the way into the Arctic. And if we put on the upper air temperatures, look at that air mass flooding our way. Now, of course, because it's mid-November, we haven't got that much cold air to tap into. There's something I've continued to reiterate over the past couple of weeks. Even if we do see something very cold in terms of the synoptic pattern for mid-November, like we've got here, it won't always deliver what we'd expect from those sort of corresponding synoptics. And that is because the air mass is just not quite there for the time of year. If this was even a week or two later, the air masses would be slightly colder. Give it a month, early mid-December, we would be looking at potentially really cold conditions. These are sort of synoptic patterns we were seeing, for example, in December 2010. We saw these recurring and staying pretty strong, and that's why it was such a cold month. But if we sort of saw these patterns reiterate and continue to recur later on in November, early December, that's when we could be looking at some proper cold, wintry conditions. This could just be a bit of an appetizer if we believe these longer range charts. You can see the -5 isotherm moves in for all. And if we actually zoom in, you can see even at the -8 isotherm moves in. That's kind of a threshold for low-lying snow, the -8 threshold. We normally say -5, but especially out of kind of a midwinter, i.e. sort of December, January time, we are normally looking at -8 for low-lying areas. -5 is the threshold for sort of higher elevation areas and just generally seeing wintry precipitation become a possibility. But if we're looking for low-lying snow and wintriness, -8, and we're just about getting there on this run, which is pretty exceptional. It's not widespread and it's not hanging on for more than a day or two, but it is pretty exceptional. And if we do look at the surface temperatures, look at this. Sunday, the 16th of November at 6 p.m. Temperatures are struggling to get much above 3 or 4 degrees, and some areas are below freezing. That is remarkable. And if we actually have a look at the midday temperature here, 4-5 degrees at best, and overnight widely below freezing. So a really cold pattern here from the GFS. We can see if we zoom out that it doesn't last too long. The high pressure eventually topples and it does go pretty westerly after that. But nonetheless, a really cold chart, probably the coldest GFS chart we've shown in the video for the autumn so far. There probably have been some operational runs, given it's run 4 times a day, that we haven't sort of highlighted in the videos that have maybe been as cold. But for me personally, that's the coldest run I've seen this autumn so far, and yeah, pretty in line with our expectations over the past few days. And of course, going back to our winter look ahead last week, this is again just backing up those assertions, both from the longer range models and from the Met Office, who also are predicting a higher chance of colder weather in the early portion of winter compared to the past few years. As I said in that video, it's the coldest contingency planner I've seen from Met Office for the last 5 years, which is how long I've been looking at those charts. So yeah, definitely in line with those expectations. We'll continue to having to monitor that. Now, the thing is, it's not just the GFS, it's the GM and the ECMWF. You can even argue the ECMWF is even colder. If we look at the GM first, again, low pressure coming in off the Atlantic, mild and nothing too remarkable. Into the weekend, high pressure begins to build towards Greenland, and it starts to open the door to those northerly winds. And similar to the GFS, those northerly winds start to get going. Now, there's a little bit of uncertainty about where the block is going. It's not particularly succinct block like the GFS had, but it's not toppling either at day 10. If we actually look at those upper air temperatures, look at the cold pool that is heading our way. Again, unsure how much of this northerly wind or how long this northerly wind will hang on for, but if we just simply follow those isobars, follow the wind direction, northerly winds are coming straight out of the Arctic, and you see the jet stream, the main bulk of the jet stream is pushed well to our south, and we would be looking at some very cold air moving our way. So perhaps not as quite as sort of abundantly cold as the GFS, but it's definitely a very similar pattern, unlocking the door to significant cold potentially into the second half of the month. And finally, if we look at the ECMWF, which as I said, is perhaps even colder than the GFS today, west to southwesterly winds continue to push in that high pressure, nudges towards Greenland into next week, but still, because of the positioning of this low to our west, it's still actually a westerly flow for the time being. But very quickly, that low gets pushed to our south, and we are in kind of a perfect storm for cold and maybe even snowy conditions, with a ridge extending towards Greenland and Iceland. Cold air moving towards Scandinavia. East to northeasterly wind is developing, and look at that chart by the 18th of November. The tropospheric polar vortex is extending towards the UK. If we look at the northern hemisphere view, you can see it's extending towards the UK. Look how far back those isobars travel, straight from the Arctic, if not from Siberia. And if we look at those air masses, look at that wind howling towards the UK. Now again, because it is still mid-November, a lot of this cold air will not survive its journey towards northern and western Europe. But regardless, at 360 hours, we are in a very cold synoptic pattern. Low pressure nearby means there would be plenty of showers. And given the air mass, if we look at that, given the air mass, you can see -5 isotherm quite widely, the 2-meter temperatures below freezing, dew points below freezing. We would be looking at not only mountainous and hill snow, but we would be looking at low-lying snow in this specific scenario. I do stress this specific scenario because a subtle change, and of course, we factor in uncertainty, there could be a lot of alterations. But as I said at the start of the video, these are the coldest charts I've seen so far this autumn. They were going to happen. We were going to see very cold charts at some point, but it is just pretty typical that they've cropped up just as we're starting to suggest potentially a cold start to the winter. We're now seeing some fruition within our daily videos, and I think it is going to be an incredibly interesting watch not only the next few days, but the next few weeks in general. Because if we go by those longer range charts, this might not just be a one and done potential cold risk. This could be a recurring risk throughout the early portion of the winter. As I said, the Met Office were looking at sort of December, January time for that higher wintry potential this year compared to last year. Again, they only put it as a 1 times multiplier on the predictions in terms of cold potential, but we've got to stress that in prior years, they've normally given it a 0.4, 0.3, or maybe even 0.5 times the normal sort of average for cold. And that's because, again, they use quite historic averages. So yeah, definitely this year, we've got some real prospects and we're starting to see that appearing here. So yeah, another very interesting chart from the ECMWF. Now, it says, I must stress, it's not a done deal. If we look at the ensembles, you can see most are above average over the next week. But around the middle of the month, we start to see some that go very cold, including the GFS operational run. Again, there are still some milder runs. There are still some other very cold runs, but it's not a done deal, as I said. There is still a lot of spread, still a lot of uncertainty appearing here. If we look at the ECMWF ensembles, it's broadly very similar. We've got, again, a lot of spread. Some very cold runs, like the operational run. By no means is an outlier. There's plenty of cold runs there. But there are plenty of milder runs as well. And that's why, as I said, it is looking good. There's definitely a lot of prospects, a lot more prospects than we've had in some prior years. But equally, there is still the milder options. And until we start to see not only consistency from the operational runs, because, you know, yesterday and the days before, ECMWF was showing an easterly wind, now showing a north or northeasterly. So once we see some consistency both from the operational runs, some proper backup from the ensembles, which we've not got yet, once we get those, then we'll be able to have a little bit more of a bold prediction instead of continuing to say hints and prospects, because unfortunately that's all it is right now, given that lack of support. But definitely those hints and prospects are increasing day by day, very slowly, but day by day. Every time we see another colder run, every time we see a few more ensembles going on that colder trend, those possibilities do become a little bit higher. I must stress though, meantime, the next week, we are still looking pretty unsettled, pretty mild. Hopefully towards the back end of the next 7 days, we do start to see things turning a little bit more mundane, a little bit drier as that high pressure ridge starts to build in, but equally it's likely to cool things down as well, bringing the prospects of slightly colder days and maybe overnight frosts if we do bring in some slacker winds and maybe some slightly colder air masses. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. So not too much going on the next 7 days. It's after that when we start to see some potentially really interesting charts starting to appear. I suspect the next sort of few days and the next couple of weeks will be very interesting model watching indeed. So make sure you do stay tuned to the videos. We'll have more updates out over the coming days and hopefully actually have another winter look ahead out, as we will have had the latest November data for not only the next sort of few weeks, next month, but for the next kind of 3 to 6 months with those longer range ECMWF forecasts as well. So we should have that out in the coming days. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.